because we've only got a few hours to go before the ceasefire does come to an end. It's a case of who blinks first, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I said that before, and you have two proud delegations on both sides of the table. You've got the Americans with President Trump, who is proud, albeit mercurial, and then you've got the Iranians who are proud, and we just don't understand who's making the decisions. So we'll have to see, but I would hope that simultaneously both sides would blink so we could get back to the negotiations.
That could be prearranged, couldn't it, I suppose?
It could be, by the Pakistanis. And the Pakistanis are the underrated factor in this entire discussion.
We don't have time to discuss that. No doubt we will do. General Mark Kimmitt there, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Anza Saqib Akund is a security and defence analyst, and she joins us now live from Lahore in Pakistan. Anza, thank you so much for joining us. As General Kimmitt was just saying, the Pakistanis have a role to play, and it's one which is rather understated. What is their role, and how important is this for the country?
So I think this new shift in global order, this is definitely a defining moment for Pakistan, because it has definitely given us a moment where Pakistan has been able to bring two parties with completely different strategic interests to the negotiating table. Now, whether this is the finest diplomatic hour or the greatest risk in diplomacy that Pakistan has taken, it has reinvented the very playbook of diplomacy and conflict resolution as we know it in this part of the world, because what international institutions like the United Nations and NATO couldn't do, Pakistan, an economically fragile country otherwise, who was hit with the false narrative of so-called terrorism back in the day, has now repositioned itself as the host of these Islamabad talks. Now, this is a most significant diplomatic achievement. However, there's also a sense of vulnerability that we've seen. So Pakistan has the most to gain from a deal and the most to lose from a resumed war as well, because I think that the economy is already under severe IMF-supervised fiscal adjustment, and it cannot absorb another round of oil price shocks. Pakistan's remittance economy, it's a largest source of foreign exchange, depends heavily on the Pakistani diaspora in the Gulf states, who are now in economic and physical peril. At the same time, now Pakistan's nuclear status and its relationship with both China and the United States gives it a unique mediation credibility. If this deal does happen, even if a partial one, it elevates an international standing for Pakistan in a way that has lasted strategic, that will have lasting strategic dividends. That is why I think there's all eyes are on Pakistan at this point in time, and especially now that we see that the relationship between both US and Iran at this point in time is a transformational one, where both parties are trying to gain as much strategic leverage as possible, rather than going towards a more transformational end to this conflict. I think that the Islamabad process has shown that the US is genuinely seeking a diplomatic resolution at this point in time. However, this is, like with Iran's appearance, we do see that they are trying to be, positively pragmatic. However, I think that the fact that Baghdadi used the term media game, framing the US's willingness towards coming to a truce, or rather carrying on the negotiations, has definitely resonated across the global south and China and Russia. So I think that at this point in time, Iran's use of any military language is a direct response to military action against it during the ceasefire. So the asymmetry of who took what action first matters to the international audience as much as it does to Iran in particular. So the Islamabad peace process has revealed something more important than whether this holds. Mm-hmm.
Anza, you mentioned China. What's been the role of China in the background here, given the Pakistani foreign minister at the start of all this visited Beijing?
Absolutely. So you see, I think that one thing that is for sure is that we're no longer living in a unipolar world. That's absolutely clear to everyone. Now, in my opinion, China and Russia, they are going to become somewhat strategic winners of this crisis, and China in particular. So the one party that has not been asked to comment outright throughout this crisis, but whose strategic position has been transformed by it is China. Now, the Iran-US war and the diplomatic so-called lengthening of the peace talks in Islamabad have delivered China several strategic gifts simultaneously. So every barrel of Iranian oil that the US blockade prevents from reaching Western markets is a barrel that strengthens China's bilateral energy relationship with Iran, which continues regardless of sanctions or blockades, unless we see secondary sanctions being put on China. Now, the US military focus on the Persian Gulf has consumed carrier group assets, intelligence bandwidth, and diplomatic capital that would otherwise be directed towards the South China Sea and the Taiwan state, for example. And now the Global South's reading of US's, like I said, media game diplomacy, this reinforces China's narrative that the US global leadership is coercive rather than cooperative, something that the Chinese have been banking on in the past as well for exploring multi-stakeholder partnerships. So this is precisely the narrative that China has been building for a decade. Similarly, I think that Russia could possibly benefit as well, since its energy exports have been partially replaced. Mm-hmm.
Anza, that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for joining us. Anza Saqib joining us from Lahore. Now, the Iran war has triggered the biggest global energy crisis in decades. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has driven up fuel prices globally. But the conflict has also affected other countries, as Umi Kulsum Sharif now explains.
The only maritime passage from this oil and natural gas producing hub into the Indian Ocean has been effectively closed since the start of the war. The result, more than 500 million barrels of crude oil have been taken off the markets. Now, a shortage in supply has led to higher fuel prices everywhere. Asia, the world's manufacturing hub, is the worst hit. 90% of its oil and gas passes through this waterway. Now, because of what's happening here, several industries have been affected, those that depend on fossil fuel byproducts and the minerals of the region. Among them, fertilizer manufacturing. Now, fertilizer prices shot up 30 to 50% within weeks of the conflict. It's now threatening global crop yields and the availability of food. Now, the high energy prices and the shortage in petrochemical feedstock, which is essentially raw material derived from refining oil and natural gas, is impacting the production capacity, be it in plastics, in steels, in aluminum, or automotive manufacturing. Now, helium supplies have also been disrupted, with 1/3 of global production offline. Qatar, which accounts for about 30% of those supplies, has halted production after attacks on its facilities. Now it's affecting the semiconductor industry and medical imaging, among others. The aviation industry is seeing disruptions. Jet fuel prices have shot up 50 to 60%, and that means airlines have been forced to increase price costs. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency says Europe roughly has about 6 weeks of jet fuel supply left. Now, shipping, the backbone of global trade, has also been hit hard. Now, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has left hundreds of oil tankers and commercial ships stranded for weeks. Now, threats of attacks here, which connects to the Suez Canal, has led ships to take the longer route and go right round the Cape of Good Hope to reach European shores, and that increases transit time. And finally, tourism, it's being impacted. Now, estimates suggest the losses are anywhere between $30 to $55 billion. Remember, countries here have been increasing tourism investment with the aim of diversifying their economies, but the war could change all that.
Israel says Hezbollah has fired rockets at its troops in southern Lebanon in what it's calling a blatant violation of the ceasefire that started last week. Israel has been carrying out airstrikes on the south in violation of the 10-day truce. One attack wounded at least 6 people in Nabatea district on Monday. Israel says it's targeting the Iranian allied group. Meanwhile, Lebanon's prime minister says he's not seeking confrontation with Hezbollah, but won't be intimidated. Nawaf Salam was speaking after meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris. Salam says he's going to Washington with a clear objective, a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon. A second round of talks between Lebanon and Israel is due on Thursday.
We do not seek confrontation with Hezbollah. On the contrary, I would like to avoid confrontation with Hezbollah. But believe me, we will not allow ourselves to be intimidated by Hezbollah, nor those who blow hot and cold when it comes to civil war.
Zina Khoda has this update from Beirut.
Not all people who have been displaced by the conflict have returned to their homes. The ceasefire remains fragile, and there's still insecurity in the south, while Israeli military continues to occupy towns and villages close to the border. On Thursday, the United States is bringing together the Israeli and Lebanese ambassadors for a second meeting. They're expected to discuss the possibility of extending the ceasefire. It's a 10-day temporary truce, which is expected to expire on Sunday. According to the Speaker of Parliament, Nabi Berri, who met the U.S. ambassador to Lebanon, who's been involved in these discussions, Berri said that the United States is working to extend that ceasefire. But, the difficulty is going to be when negotiations actually begin because of the differing agendas. Lebanon wants Israel to withdraw from southern Lebanon. Israel wants the Lebanese state to disarm Hezbollah. Hezbollah has yet again repeated a call on the Lebanese government not to engage in direct talks with Israel. It believes it is a humiliation. It believes the Lebanese government does not have much leverage. What Hezbollah wants is for Lebanon to link with the broader regional diplomacy that involves Iran and Islamabad. Hezbollah, of course, being an ally of Iran, believes that this will give Lebanon more leverage. So there are internal divisions in Lebanon. That ceasefire is fragile. There are some violations. Israel continues to demolish homes in towns and villages across the south. And many people who don't have homes to return to and who are still scared and reluctant to return are sleeping in tents and in their cars. Zana Khudr, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Israel attacks on Lebanon have killed close to 2,300 people. More than 1.2 million have been displaced. New satellite images from Planet Labs reveal the extent of the Israeli army's destruction of southern Lebanon. Now, this was the border town of Nakura on the 18th of February. And this shows the same town on the 16th of April. Al Jazeera's analysis indicates large parts of the town have been leveled, with most homes and infrastructure severely damaged. The Belgian foreign minister has called Israel's actions in Lebanon totally unacceptable. He made the comments as EU foreign ministers met in Luxembourg to discuss the Middle East conflict and other issues.
Israel's attitude is totally unacceptable. Of course, the initial attacks by Hezbollah must be firmly condemned. In seeking to show solidarity with Iran, it has dragged Lebanon into a war it did not want. Israel's disproportionate and indiscriminate response is deeply problematic and condemnable. I can only welcome the fact that finally, after so many decades, direct dialogue can take place between the Israeli and Lebanese authorities.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines this hour now. Funerals are being held in Gaza after Israeli attacks killed at least 5 people. Mourners gathered in Khan Yunis in the south of the Strip, where 3 Palestinians were killed in an attack near a police checkpoint. Further north, in Beit Lahia, a Palestinian woman was killed by Israeli gunboat fire.
Last Tuesday, he got engaged to a wonderful young woman, and we were preparing celebrations. He was so excited, but this was his fate, to not continue his life with her.
They were protecting people, their properties and their livelihoods. It was after midnight. What danger did they constitute to the enemy so that a drone strikes and kills them? This is a cold-blooded killing that doesn't respect the truce or any form of the ceasefire.
You know, Israeli settlers have opened fire on a school in the occupied West Bank, killing 2 Palestinians, including a 13-year-old boy. The territory has seen a surge in settler violence this year. Al Jazeera's Noor Odeh reports from Ramallah.
No words can console these grieving mother and father. Israeli settlers killed their 32-year-old son Jihad as they attacked the school in Al-Mghayr village near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Jihad was trying to evacuate the students to safety. Gunfire can be heard in this video, captured by an eyewitness. A second mother grieves her 13-year-old child, Aus. Israeli settlers shot him in the head during the same attack. Grief turns to anger as crowds pour out of the emergency room, carrying the bodies of the latest victims of settler attacks in Al-Mghayr.
Settlers attacked the school and began firing live ammunition. The army then immediately joined them, opening fire as we were trying to evacuate the students.
These killings evoked bitter memories in the village. 7 years ago, Aus's father, Hamdi, was also shot and killed by Israeli settlers attacking Al-Mghayr village. Aus was 6 at the time. No one was ever held to account. Residents in Al-Mghayr say the people who killed Jihad and Aus will enjoy the same impunity. They say these attacks target their very existence. And as they grieve the losses, new and old, they live to protect their land another day. Noor Odeh, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, Palestine.
You're watching Al Jazeera. A reminder of our top stories at this hour. With the truce between the United States and Iran set to expire on Wednesday, time is running out to get them to the negotiating table in Islamabad. It is still unclear whether talks will take place. President Trump says the U.S. is ready for war if there is no agreement. The United States has not yet sent its delegation, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, to Pakistan. Iranian media reports say no representatives, including any expert or technical delegation, have gone to Islamabad. Tehran's chief negotiator says there won't be talks under threat of renewed violence. Israel has accused Hezbollah of violating the ceasefire in Lebanon, a day after Israeli forces carried out attacks on the south. Monday's airstrikes wounded at least 6 people in Nabatea. Israel says Hezbollah fired rockets on its troops on Tuesdays. Right, well, I'm going to hand it over now to Al Jazeera's team in Washington, D.C. It is our regular segment from the U.S. Capitol. This is America, bringing you deeper insight into the debates shaping America and the world.
This is America, where the U.S. president says his military strikes have killed so many senior Iranian leaders that the U.S. doesn't know who's left to deal with. So how's that now complicating negotiations with the U.S.? I'll be back with more on that later, but first, here's Cyril Vanier in our Washington studio.
Hi, Joe Castro. Thank you very much. 7 weeks after the U.S. and Israel launched a war against Iran, the Iranian establishment has not collapsed and appears to believe that it can still shape the terms of negotiation with the United States. While some voices in Iran are engaging in talks, a new generation of Revolutionary Guard is driving a harder bargain, ready to maximize economic hurt on the global economy by threatening maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. So did the U.S. get caught out and underestimate the conflicting points of power in Iran? Well, Donald Trump says that he has Iran right where he wants them. Here's the U.S. president talking to CNBC.
That we're going to end up with a great deal. I think they have no choice. We've taken out their Navy. We've taken out their Air Force. It is regime change, no matter what you want to call it. Iran can get themselves on a very good footing if they make a deal. They can make themselves into a strong nation again, a wonderful nation again. We've totally won the war. You know, if you read the New York Times, you think, oh, gee, when are we surrendering? We have totally beat them.
But despite that, questions remain as to whether Donald Trump's team is talking to the right people in Iran.
Now you have the IRGC practically becoming the state. You're talking about an IRGC that is now almost in control of governance. They make the final decision. And that's even more dangerous.
almost every one of us voted to designate the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. Those votes, they didn't just happen for no reason.
We have no way to control what comes next, which most experts believe would be the Iranian Revolutionary Guard-led government rising up and being just as repressive and antagonistic as the current theocracy, and perhaps even more committed to the acquisition of nuclear weapons.
And both sides, the United States and Iran, have advertised their red lines, their non-negotiables. But who decides if a deal is reached? Here in the U.S., there is little doubt that that decision ultimately rests with the president. In Iran, though, there are multiple voices delivering sometimes mixed signals. Here's Phil Lavelle.
There is a standoff in the Strait of Hormuz. One day it's open, next it's closed.
You will return to your previous protocol in Iran.
And now the US blocking it, firing on and seizing Iranian-flagged vessels trying to get through. Iran calls it armed piracy and theft, chaos on a critical waterway and a chokehold on a huge chunk of the world's oil supply. Here is where we were, war, and here is where we are now, ceasefire, and here is where America wants to be, and quickly, a deal. But it's that final stretch, that final push, getting to a deal that is proving to be quite the challenge.
We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms.
But who exactly are the Americans negotiating with? Well, we hear the words Iranian regime quite a lot, and President Trump says there are new figures in charge.
It's a regime change. They are much more, I think, frankly, more intelligent and more moderate.
But who is making the decisions? Who is he referring to? Is it the new supreme leader who took over after his father was killed in the opening days of the war? Mujtaba Khamenei hasn't been seen in person since, just occasional messages online, leading to questions over who really is in control. Is it the diplomats? They are the ones issuing the public statements after all. The likes of the foreign minister and the president, the public faces, even doing the rounds on US and international media.
All of this is America's fault. We did not start this war. We are only defending ourselves.
Or is it the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's internal, much feared security force? It was the IRGC that said on Saturday the strait would remain closed, just hours after the foreign minister said it would be reopened. And the question is, what next for President Trump, who appears to be caught between two competing narratives? Remember too, this is about more than the strait. Iran's nuclear ambitions are a big part of it. It's been enriching uranium, it says, for peaceful means. President Trump pulled out of the original nuclear deal in his first term.
We have terminated a terrible, terrible deal that should have never, ever been made.
But that took the previous administration 18 months to reach, and that was during peacetime. The current one is trying to reach a solution in a matter of days and in the midst of an active conflict. Will more talks actually happen? If so, they'll be in Islamabad. But it is here, 11,000 kilometers away, that the ultimate decision of what America does next will be made by one man. As for how Iran responds, or who decides on Iran's response, well, that is a whole other question. Phil Lavelle, Al Jazeera, Washington.
And Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna is live at the White House. So, Mike, does the White House at this point still feel that it has the upper hand in negotiations?
Well, President Trump certainly does believe he has the upper hand in negotiations. He said so repeatedly. He stated again and again that the U.S. has already won the war. He insists that the nuclear dust, as he puts it, which is the reactive chemical, the nuclear munitions that the Iranians have for peaceful purposes, they say, he says that has all been destroyed by the bombers. But at the same time, he insists that he will continue with this war, even though he says he has already won it. But as to what the White House thinks, people within the White House Well, that's very difficult because they refer everything to what the president thinks. One very brief example, in the course of the day, we've been trying to ascertain exactly what time this ceasefire ends. The president himself has given 4 different timings for when it should end. The White House are telling us all the time, just follow the words of the president. Well, we follow the words of the president, but then it's very difficult to find out exactly which words to follow, exactly what time he has specified for the ceasefire to end.
Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna live from the White House. Thank you very much, Mike. Now, Heidi Jo Castro is back with us and takes a look at what the U.S. media has been saying about the current state of this conflict.
Cyril, the American media briefly celebrated when the Iranian foreign minister announced last week the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But that quickly changed when the Revolutionary Guard shot at tankers and said the strait was back closed. So how was that received by Trump's inner circle? Well, the news site Axios captured the surprise of a senior administration official who's quoted as saying, "We thought they," that's the U.S. deal team, "were negotiating with the right people. But what happened is the Iranian team went back and the IRGC and those kinds of people said, oh, no, you don't speak for us." Another U.S. official said, "We aren't sure who's in charge, and neither do they." Yes, that is confusing and complicating the latest talks as the conflict over Hormuz threatens to escalate. The Washington Post said those talks are on shaky footing after U.S. seizure of ship in Strait of Hormuz. And National Public Radio put it simply, peace talks are in doubt. So what does Trump think now? Well, he told the New York Post that he will not be rushed to end the Iran war, and he lashed out at Democrats and Republicans for urging him to settle. As a negotiator, and I'm a great negotiator, he's quoted as fuming to the paper, how bad is it when you have people from your own country trying to reach a deal? They are helping the other side. The other side has nothing, they have no cards, but they are using this to delay. And delay is not good for Trump, as gas prices tick higher and his approval ratings at home tick lower. For now, let's go back to you, Cyril.
So let's take a quick look at what makes this current moment, this window for negotiation, different from the one that talks in 2015 that delivered a deal with Iran ultimately. The main point of the JCPOA, as the deal is known, was to significantly restrict Iran's uranium enrichment and nuclear capacity. In return, Tehran got gradual sanctions relief. That agreement took about 20 months and several rounds of talks before it was signed. Now, both sides are aiming for a deal within days in the middle of a war. And this time, it's not just about the nuclear issue. The Strait of Hormuz, compensation for war damages, and a permanent end to the conflict, all of those things are on the agenda. The U.S. has also moved away from what was a State Department-led model to a team much closer to the White House, while Iran is made up of career diplomats, politicians, and subject matter experts. That's the delegation that they sent to Islamabad. Well, the stakes are higher, too. In 2015, failure to comply would have resulted in economic sanctions. Now, the alternative to a deal could be the resumption of the war and the bombing of infrastructure really across the region. Over the weekend, there appeared to be a breakthrough. Donald Trump announced that the Strait of Hormuz was completely open, and Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, agreed. Suddenly, there seemed to be alignment on a major issue. But then, within hours, Iran's Revolutionary Guard opened fire on a commercial tanker, suggesting that there might be significant divisions within Iran. Here's Alex Baird.
For questions stateside, who are we actually talking to in Iran? This was allegedly broadcast to ships in the Strait of Hormuz by the IRGC and has been fueling that debate online.
We will open it by the order of our leader, Imam Khamenei, not by the tweets of some idiot.
The interpretation online is that the idiot being referred to is the Iranian foreign minister, but again, the key word, allegedly. That's led some in the US to say there are now 2 Irans. National security analyst Alex Plitzer says the IRGC are blocking civilian leadership from reaching a deal. And the understanding in Washington is they are poised to seize power. The IRGC pumping out videos like this.
Shut up, Yankee.
With an increasingly hardline edge. Recent analysis from the Institute of War now at the center of the debate that within Iran there is now a major power struggle. Civilians trying to talk peace, and the IRGC saber-rattling and tightening control. Classic regime chaos. Many voices in the US now saying, if that's the case, Is there even any point in those talks?
They have to be shown that they can't win, and we have to break their will.
Right-leaning journalist Eric Doherty believes the writing is on the wall, that Trump's finger is on the trigger and he's ready to pull. Bill Mitchell, confident that the president is in complete control and that no matter who is in control in Iran, they can take the deal or face the consequences.
Let's bring in our panel now. Former U.S. Ambassador to Bahrain, William Roebuck, joins us in the studio. We're also joined by a former U.S. policy planner at the State Department, John Alterman. Thank you very much to both of you for being with us. Ambassador, on the back of these reports and the fact that we saw one thing from the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, who was in favor of opening the Strait of Hormuz, announced it to be opened on the Iranian side, and hours later, the IRGC did something different. They opened fire on commercial ships. So one side saying open, the other side shut it down. Is the U.S. negotiating team even talking to the right people?
It's a good question, Cyril. I think there are some fractures in the Iranian regime, but my sense, looking at it and talking to analysts who know that regime very closely, is that those fractures have not been significant in terms of hurting their command and control or hurting the overall posture in the negotiations. I think it's still, it's a bit amazing, but after all the attack that has been done on the regime and on the country of Iran, I think that regime still is relatively cohesive. Yes, some fracturing, but I would say overall that they are still operating with fairly significant degree of command and control and cohesiveness in terms of a diplomatic position.
John Alterman.
And this issue of moderates in Iran versus conservatives in Iran is something that goes back decades and decades. There has always been this element in Iran of infighting. What's different now is it's not really clear there's an arbiter. Ayatollah Khamenei was an arbiter. The previous Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the father, was able to be decisive in these, and sometimes he chose the more moderate course, and sometimes he chose the course of resistance. With his son, it's not clear he's alive. It's not clear if he's disabled. It's not clear he's in control. It's not clear he has the support of anybody. The role of an arbiter is different. It seems to me the infighting is normal. What's different is we're not sure how the infighting can or will be resolved. Although the division has been present since the early days of the Islamic Revolution, 1979.
Well, you say that it's not clear that the supreme leader's alive. Sorry, that was floated by senior Trump administration officials in the early days of the war, but even the defense secretary seems to have walked away from that now, saying he might be severely wounded, severely disfigured. He's no longer speculating that Mujtaba Khamenei might actually be dead. However, it is the case that the U.S. president, early in this bombing campaign, has said that the U.S. had killed, in fact, so many Iranian leaders that the U.S. might be left without interlocutors. Listen to this.
Their leaders are all gone. The next set of leaders are all gone. And the next set of leaders are mostly gone. And now nobody wants to be a leader over there anymore. We're having a hard time. We want to talk to them, and there's nobody to talk to.
So, Ambassador, what do you think of that? Is it possible, is it the case that the U.S. may have actually killed people that they actually wanted to talk to?
Well, there's been significant regime decapitation, as they say. Clearly, they killed significant ranks of top leaders. I think they probably did kill a few people who could have been useful in these negotiations, but that has happened. It is what it is. My sense is that they have a regime that is built on redundancy, and they have been able to replace next man standing. They have put people in positions, and they have managed to carry on. The amazing thing to me so far, although the fighting is at a ceasefire right now, but for 6 weeks, even with all that decapitation, they were able to respond in the moment and in retaliation in ways that were measured and were very specific to what they had received in terms of a military thrust. So I think they have managed to replace leadership and to keep going.
John Alterman, there was a line in Axios reporting that was attributed to a senior U.S. official whom, when they saw the IRGC opening fire on commercial tankers just after the Iranian foreign minister had said the Strait of Hormuz is open, they said, oh, it looks like the people the way this was interpreted by U.S. officials was the people we are talking to are actually being then undermined by the IRGC. Do you feel right now there is continuity in the negotiations, in the talks, communications between the U.S. and Iran?
I think there is. I think every government, including the U.S. government that I'm familiar with, you talk to negotiators. The negotiators are trying to represent the government. Sometimes they lie. Sometimes they don't know what's happening. I think that there's always a sort of distance between the people who are doing the diplomacy and the people who are making the statecraft decisions at home. Again, I think that the difference...
So this is not particularly unusual?
I don't think it's totally unusual. I think that the difference is it is not at all clear to me who is actually calling the shots. That's a little different for Iran, although the confusion about who's calling the shots is fairly customary in Iran.
So as the U.S. and Iran both weigh their options right now within this window that allows for some diplomacy, one thing they both have in common is that they do not trust each other. Both sides expect that they're going to be either lied to or bombed or otherwise deceived or manipulated. Here's Al Jazeera's Manuel Rapallo.
Iran agreed to restrict its uranium enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief in 2015 under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the Iran nuclear deal. In 2018, Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from the deal, and last year, widespread sanctions were reimposed on Iran. The two countries later entered indirect talks with hopes of reviving that agreement. But after 5 rounds of negotiations, Israel and then the U.S. carried out strikes targeting military and nuclear infrastructure, and Iran retaliated. Indirect talks resumed again earlier this year, with Oman as mediator. On February 27th, Oman's foreign minister said a deal was, quote, within reach. The next day, the U.S. and Israel launched their assault on Iran. So the Iranians may have good reason to not trust the U.S. going into these negotiations, but so does the U.S. In 1995 and 1996, Iran secretly began pursuing nuclear technology, signing agreements with China and Russia to work on previously decommissioned nuclear facilities. In 2002, 2 secret nuclear sites in Natanz and Iraq were revealed, leading the U.S. to accuse Tehran of attempting to build nuclear weapons. Now, as we mentioned, in 2015, Iran agreed to restrict its uranium enrichment. In 2019, Iran began enriching uranium to well above the 3.67% limit of the JCPOA. By 2021, the country was enriching uranium to 60% purity, a major step closer to reaching the 90% threshold for weapons-grade uranium. There's also Iran's support for its regional allies, especially over the past few years. In 2023, the Houthis, who are backed by Iran, launched hundreds of missiles and drones and merchant ships in the Red Sea. In 2024, the Houthis directly attacked a U.S.-owned and operated ship. And on March 2nd, most recently, Hezbollah joined the war on Iran's behalf, exchanging attacks with U.S. ally Israel.
That's Manuel Rapallo. John Alterman, you wanted to address this trust gap, trust deficit.
I spoke to Wendy Sherman, who's one of the negotiators of the JCPOA, shortly after, and I asked about this issue of trust with the Iranians. And I was surprised she was very dismissive you even needed trust. Her point was you need an agreement that is clear, that is verifiable, that takes the place of trust, because I got the sense that she didn't even think trust was going to be on the table. I'm not sure there's trust, but I'm not sure there's ever been trust, and certainly after the conduct both ways. Trust is not what we need here. We need an agreement that gives us a path forward to resolve some of these issues.
Yeah, so it's not actually a factor, not needed, and in fact the negotiations, you could argue, are taking place because there is no trust. Ambassador?
I think so. I think in a negotiation like this, what you need is a fairly precise calculation of interests on each side, and some sense by each side that they have some leverage and some stake in the game, that there can be an agreement and that it will be enforced, and people can move forward from there.
And a verification mechanism both ways.
Right. So if both sides want to establish leverage and really shape the negotiating space for the other side, or rather constrain the negotiating space for the other side, my question is, in the last 7 weeks, has Donald Trump's strategy worked? There's been bombing, now there's an economic blockade, right, with the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. So there's been kinetic action and now economic action. Has it worked to constrain Iran and shape their negotiating environment?
I think, Bill's point is exactly right, that you need to sort of shape what your adversary can do. It seems to me that in this case, each side thinks that time is on its side. The Iranians think that they can take pain for longer than the United States. The United States thinks we can inflict lots of pain and we can inflict more. And it feels to me like where we are now is each side trying to capitalize on the fact that it has more time than the other. That ultimately turns into a game of chicken. And as we know with games of chicken, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't.
Ambassador Roebuck, we've watched Donald Trump, want to set the stage for negotiations that would be favorable to the U.S. in multiple different arenas and different settings, right? He's done it with tariffs. He's done it in different ways. Do you think it is working in this arena against Iran?
His techniques are working. I mean, his use of threatening language, for example. I think the blockade was a very savvy move to put additional pressure on Iran and to take away their positive use of the Strait of Hormuz. I think the problem he's facing is that there's a part, I think, of his psychology. I'm not sure he wants a deal. I think he's not predisposed to reach some sort of diplomatic agreement with the Iranian side, and it's creating, I think,
what makes you say that?
I just feel like he is, based on his previous history, 10 years of railing against the JCPOA, railing against the efforts of President Obama, former President Carter. I think he has locked himself into a stance that the only good agreement with the Iranian side is essentially a capitulation, that we give them terms and they accept them.
Is that still on the table at this point, capitulation? 7 weeks.
I think
There's
it's
no
what the
sign
president
right?
still wants. I think the president is determined to make the Iranians cry uncle.
But there's no sign that it's coming. From the outside looking in, and granted, we are not in those rooms. We don't know how close or how far they are from their goal, right? But from the outside looking in, there isn't a sign, zero, that capitulation might be on the way or around the corner.
Except the president's language demanding it. And I think the president still thinks that with American firepower, targeting intelligence, the ability to block the strait, all those things, that he can make them collapse or fear collapse and give him what he wants. I think what, Bill's years of diplomacy are all about how do you help the other side save face? How do you make it easier to accept? The president's not interested in making it easier to accept. He's interested in showing how he dominated a weaker party. And that desire to come away showing he dominated, rather than come away with an agreement that lets you build toward resolving the issue further down the road, I think may be something that leads us toward more violence rather than a near-term agreement, whether in the long term it leads us to a better agreement or some sort of collapse or something else. That's, I think, the president's bet, but I'm not sure, where other parties are on this.
So we wanted to ask Americans what they want, since this is being conducted, this war and the ceasefire and the negotiation, on their behalf. Here's Al Jazeera's Heidi Jo Castro.
We're lucky to get visitors from all over the country to Washington, Cyril, as this gives us the opportunity to talk to people from all sorts of places. And today, I asked them if they have hope for these negotiations with Iran.
I just really have hope in that nothing bad keeps going on to the soldiers that are being deployed there. Whatever it is that's happening over there, whatever negotiation, I don't think it's worth risking the lives of many soldiers.
Do you have hope for negotiations right now between the U.S. and Iran?
Not particularly.
Why is that?
Because I don't think the people that are negotiating have the skills to negotiate.
On the U.S. side or Iran side?
On the U.S. side, I have no idea about the Iran side.
Do you think it was a mistake or good policy for Trump to have then withdrawn the U.S. from the Iranian nuclear deal?
It was a very bad idea. Withdrawing was stupid.
How so?
Well, I mean, everything I've read and everything I've heard is that it was working. They were being very closely monitored and it was working. So, that's what keeps happening. All the things that are working are getting broken.
And there we have it, the opinions of some American voices on these negotiations. Cyril?
Heidi, thank you very much. Ambassador Roebuck, well, both of you, I should say, have been involved in diplomacy. I'm interested in hearing from both of you on how these kinds of moments play out behind closed doors. And Ambassador Roebuck, I'm mindful of the fact that you've done boots on the ground diplomacy. If I'm not mistaken, you were embedded with U.S. forces in northeastern Syria, but on the diplomatic front of what they were doing. So what happens in a moment like this behind closed doors?
Well, to be honest, the visibility we have in this negotiation is not good at all. I gather from what I've read that they exchange positions. They spend a lot of time, sort of examining each other's positions. But I'm not at all clear how much progress they made actually on the previous round of negotiations. The Iranians seem to think they made a lot of progress. The American side, led by Vice President Vance, was dismissive, and at least publicly. Again, there's so much spin from each side about what happened inside a room which don't have visibility on. It's difficult to know precisely what went on, but it seemed like the gaps were fairly significant. They made progress, but they didn't close it. And it's just not surprising in one round of negotiations.
John Alterman, real quick, go ahead.
No, and there's a real disjuncture here, because the U.S. is a much more powerful country, and certainly even more powerful after these military actions. But for the Iranians, this is existential. They've been preparing for 50 years. They have the same negotiating team that's been negotiating for decades. They know all our moves. This is the most important issue for them. And I think that disparity between us and them, President bets it works for them, the Iranians are betting it works for them.
John Alterman, Ambassador William Roebuck, thank you very much to both of you for joining the program today. That's it from us here in Washington, D.C. And on This Is America, we will keep following the decisions that shape the U.S. and influence the rest of the world. Thank you for joining us. Back to Al Jazeera headquarters in Doha.
Hello, thank you for watching us. I'm Sarah Khairat, and this is Al Jazeera live from Doha with our extensive coverage of developments out of Iran, the US and Lebanon. Here are the latest lines. A second round of negotiations between Iran and the United States struggles to get started. Trump says the US is ready to return to war. Iran says the US naval blockade and attacking Iranian ships is an act of war. In Islamabad, Pakistan says it's still waiting for a formal response from Iran on whether it will attend talks. Calling for a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops, Lebanon's Prime Minister says he won't be intimidated by Hezbollah ahead of talks in Washington. The ceasefire between the US and Iran is set to expire on Wednesday. Last-minute diplomacy has so far failed to get the two sides back to the negotiating table in Islamabad. President Donald Trump says he doesn't want to extend the ceasefire. Instead, he's suggesting US forces are ready to go militarily if an agreement isn't reached. The White House hasn't sent its delegation to Islamabad as expected, and that's because the Iranians haven't decided whether they will be attending. Tehran says it won't negotiate under threat, and the country's chief negotiator has said Iran is ready to reveal new cards on the battlefield if fighting restarts. Well, with just hours until the ceasefire expires, Pakistan has appealed to both sides to extend the truce. They have said it's critical that Iran makes a formal decision on attending the talks before the truce ends. We have correspondents in Tehran, the White House and Islamabad, and that's when we begin in the Pakistani capital with our White House correspondent Kimberly Holkit. So, Kimberly, the Pakistanis had remained tight-lipped for a while, but we have been hearing from them. What are they saying ahead of this ceasefire deadline?
Well, what we know is that there has been a last-ditch effort for diplomacy. In fact, what we can confirm is that the Pakistani foreign minister, among other government officials, have been working frantically in the last few hours of this ceasefire, imploring not just the Iranians, but also the Americans, reaching out to the deputy chief of mission here in Pakistan for the United States to try and extend the ceasefire. But as you reported, the U.S. president seems to have little appetite for that. As you acknowledged, he has given an interview saying that he is just as happy to see the ceasefire expire and for military action to resume. And that is of grave disappointment to the officials here in Islamabad. They have positioned themselves very carefully. All of the subject matter experts from the United States are here, whether it be from the Department of State, whether it be from the Department of Defense, or even the National Security Council, which is part of the White House. The teams are ready to go, and there was an expectation that not just the United States, but also we would have an Iranian delegation arriving in a matter of hours for the second round of direct talks to take place on Wednesday. But as we know now, the signals have indicated just the opposite, given the fact that the vice president's plane is not yet airborne and his envoys are also not en route to Islamabad.
All right, thank you very much, Kimberly Halkett there, keeping us across those latest lines coming out of Islamabad. Let's now go to Tehran, Iran's capital. That's where Ali Hashim is live for us. Ali, Iran determined that it won't go ahead with these talks unless a precondition is met. What can you tell us about that? And also, what are we hearing that's coming out of Iran?
Well, it's clear that Iran hasn't taken the decision to go to Islamabad. However, it's still willing to in case the blockade is lifted. This is what the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said. And we've heard a lot of stances coming from Iranian officials, from Kalibaf, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament and the lead negotiator, very early in the morning when he said that Iran is ready and has surprises if the war is going to be resumed. Let me take this opportunity to read the latest tweet by Abbas Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister. He says, blockading Iranian ports is an act of war and thus a violation of the ceasefire. Striking a commercial vessel and taking its crew hostage is an even greater violation. Iran knows how to neutralize restrictions, how to defend its interests, and how to resist bullying. What we have here is the first tweet by Abbas Araghchi since yesterday, maybe. However, we don't have an answer in the foreign minister's tweet to whether his country is going to go to Pakistan or not, because this tweet can be understood in different ways. Now, there's another important stance that we saw just a few minutes ago coming from the commander of the IRGC Aerospace Force, and this looks like a threat. He says Iran's southern neighbors should know that if their geography and facilities are used by enemies to attack the Iranian nation, they must say goodbye to oil production in the Middle East region. This is part of several stances and positions we've seen from different Iranian institutions and personalities mentioning the possibility that the war could resume, especially that in few hours, according to the ceasefire terms, in few hours the ceasefire will expire and there's no extension. So there is a real anticipation in Tehran, or at least concern, that this war could resume.
All right, thank you very much, Ali Hashim there. That's the update from Iran. Let's now go to the White House. That's where Mike Hanna is live for us. Mike, even more statements coming out from the US president since we last spoke. Has he shed any light on the US position at all?
Well, he continued to insist that he will not extend the ceasefire unless he gets agreement from Iran. He says that the US is ready to go into battle should this agreement not be forthcoming. Now, what has happened as well is that the vice president was supposed to depart for Islamabad in the course of the morning. That visit, it would appear, has been pushed back. And Vice President J.D. Vance has been with the president in the West Wing, having what White House staffers say is policy discussions. Now, I see that the Marine who guards the West Wing when the president is there has now moved from that position, which means that the president is no longer in the West Wing. We're not quite sure where the Vice President, J.D. Vance, is following his ongoing meetings with President Trump. But another point of great confusion that we've been unable to ascertain during the course of the day is exactly what time does President Trump think that the ceasefire expires, because he's given a number of different times when he believes the ceasefire will expire, stemming from 8:32, 6:32 local time this evening, U.S. time, Washington time, until Wednesday evening, as he said in an interview with Bloomberg. We've approached White House officials for clarity on this, and they say just follow what the president says. But what the president says is different things at different times about different times.
All right, thank you very much. Mike Hanna there reporting for us from the White House. Well, with the ceasefire nearing its expiration, let's take a moment to look at the US military deployment and also the presence in the region. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, has returned to the Middle East. It departed the Croatian port of Split in early April after a 5-day stop for repairs and resupply. The carrier now joins the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is operating in the northern Arabian Sea alongside guided missile warships. A third carrier, the USS George H.W. Bush, is rounding the Cape of Good Hope. It's expected to arrive by the end of the month, bringing the total to 3 U.S. carrier strike groups operating in the region. And the United States has deployed more than 10,000 troops, over a dozen warships and more than 100 aircraft to enforce the blockade on Iran's ports. Well, to discuss all of this, we have in the studio with me Alexandru Hudishtanu, a military analyst with expertise in maritime security, and in Lahore, Pakistan, Anza Saqib Ahund is a security and defense analyst joining us live from Lahore in Pakistan. A very warm welcome to both of you. Thank you for speaking to us here. First of all, we saw that long list of American military firepower. They've been there for a while. Do you think this is just posturing to perhaps push Iran and pressure Iran into accepting a framework or a deal that it wants? Or do you think they could very well go through it with this?
For the best part of the situation, ever since President Trump postponed the ultimatum and basically opened up the diplomatic track, the military posturing of U.S. was not step back. It was still there, still present, and still menacing. The fact that they will bring another aircraft carrier suggests that they want to have more air power and would be in line with their prosecution of the war so far, which is basically Air Force oriented and air power oriented bombing campaigns. We have to mention also the Marine Expeditionary Unit, USS Tripoli, which is in the region and from which some of this enforcement, maritime interdiction enforcement have been prosecuted. But that's not necessarily out of the logic of coercive diplomacy. So we are still on those two tracks are still valid. The war track is still there, but it's dormant. We could consider it to be an operational standby or operational pause.
So a backup, perhaps, if these talks don't come to anything?
Could be interpreted as such. So if the worst case scenario will happen, which would be return to active conflict, they are more or less in the same position that they were before. So I don't see an escalation in possibility of military options apart from what they were doing before, maybe just with more intensity, given the fact that there will be another aircraft carrier in the region. But in that sense only.
Well, Anza, I can see you nodding your head there. It seems in agreement.
Yeah, look, what I think right now, the most immediate risk once the ceasefire expires shortly is controlled but rapid re-escalation, not necessarily full-scale war. but calibrated strikes that are designed to regain the leverage. So Washington has already signaled it is prepared to resume military action if these talks fail, while Tehran is framing U.S. naval actions as violations of truce, especially in the Strait of Hormuz. So what you're likely to see is a return to coercive bargaining through force. So limited airstrikes, maritime seizures, and proxy activation as well, rather than an all-out conflict. Now, both sides want escalation dominance, but neither wants strategic overlook or overreach. So looking slightly ahead, I think the maritime domain becomes the primary battlefield of pressure. If the ceasefire collapses, Iran's most potent lever is disruption, not direct confrontation. Now that means harassment in the Strait of Hormuz and targeting shipping lanes and plausible deniability through non-state actors.
Right, and Alexandru, we've seen from the US, as you mentioned, their air power. With Iran, we've seen missiles, we've seen drones. It has said that it has naval capabilities, and that's one of the things, even though Trump says that they have decimated, in his own words, the Iranian Navy. But what else do you think they have up their sleeve?
So if we're considering just the surface combatants, most likely those are out of the question since the air campaign. But Iran has prepared for many years for asymmetric threats. So most likely their maritime power will be more distributed, small boats, fast boats. We've seen some of this already in action, attacking or reclosing the strait very abruptly. So any number of these become a nuisance. One single boat of this type is not necessarily a military threat, but 20 of them or 30 of them acting in concert become a nuisance even for proper navies. So I would dare to say in the maritime aspect, we will see this. And I tend to agree that the maritime battle space will be the first one to be escalated in case the ceasefire doesn't continue, and if they will come back, because I still think that there is a possibility if the ceasefire doesn't get extended, they might tacitly accept an extension without talking, because nobody wants to flinch here.
Just quickly on what you were saying there, do you think the US knows that, given that Iran is using asymmetric ways, that it doesn't have the firepower that the US has, do you think they know that that's more challenging and therefore wouldn't want to go ahead with that option as soon as they can?
You mean if the US would not want to go with that option?
Because, in terms of, would it make it harder because it's asymmetric?
It just becomes the idea of a hawk hunting flies. So it's not necessarily that you cannot do it. It just becomes troublesome and complicates.
A longer route, perhaps.
Yes, becomes a nuisance, basically.
Right, and Ant, I want to ask you about Pakistan's role, because you're in Pakistan yourself. Obviously, there's been high security in Islamabad, Pakistan. It's in their interest to make these talks work. What's at stake here for Pakistan if it can't bring both sides together, you know, to sort of perhaps sign a memorandum of understanding at the very least, or even a deal at best?
So from a Pakistani strategic lens, the key question is whether Islamabad can convert this crisis mediation into a sustained diplomatic architecture. So if the ceasefire collapses hours after the second round of talks as well, it definitely risks exposing the limits of Pakistan's influence. But if a temporary extension is secured, Pakistan positions itself as an indispensable back channel between adversaries. And that, to be honest, is what I predict will most likely be the situation, because we've seen everyone from the Chief of Defense Forces in Pakistan, General Asim Munir, to the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, to the other state ministers, which are going back and forth. And I think that the future trajectory, therefore, is binary. Either there's going to be a relapse into kinetic signaling within hours, or more of a fragile extension that keeps diplomacy alive, but under constant military shadow. However, I think that for Pakistan, this is definitely one where they're really calibrating their broader strategic depth and diplomacy. And
what about linking up with other players? What about, from my understanding is that Pakistan has been contacting more stakeholders. Do you know who those could be and how that could help, perhaps?
Absolutely. So Look, the Islamabad peace process has revealed something which is more important than whether this particular ceasefire holds or not. It has confirmed that the current international order has no credible mechanism for managing conflicts between a nuclear-armed great power and a non-nuclear state that has made rational decisions about deterrence. Now, Iran was attacked while negotiating, and that is definitely the reason why Pakistan is now taking other players in the Middle East, just like we saw with the Quad. So Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, and now, definitely they are going to try and influence and cause that positive influence between both parties, because at the end of the day, we have to understand that, especially in the case of the Strait of Hormuz, look, I mean, even if there is managed conflict, for the US, even if there are minor disruptions, they already shaken global markets.
Okay, I'd like to thank both of you, just because, as always, so much to discuss, but not enough time. Anza Saqib Akund, security and defence analyst, joining us from Lahore, and of course, Alexandru Hudishtanu, a military analyst with expertise in maritime security. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Right, well, the Pentagon has unveiled more details of President Donald Trump's plan to boost defence spending by $1.5 trillion in 2027. The budget would mark the biggest increase in US defence spending in the post-World War II era and includes a new category the Pentagon is calling presidential priorities. It also aims to triple spending on drones and related technology to more than $74 billion. Now, the Iran war has triggered the biggest global energy crisis in decades. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has driven up fuel prices worldwide, but the conflict has also affected other industries, as Kulsum Sharif explains.
The only maritime passage from this oil and natural gas producing hub into the Indian Ocean has been effectively closed since the start of the war. The result, more than 500 million barrels of crude oil have been taken off the markets. Now, a shortage in supply has led to higher fuel prices everywhere. Asia, the world's manufacturing hub, is the worst hit. 90% of its oil and gas passes through this waterway. Now, because of what's happening here, several industries have been affected, those that depend on fossil fuel byproducts and the minerals of the region. Among them, fertilizer manufacturing. Now, fertilizer prices shot up 30 to 50% within weeks of the conflict. It's now threatening global crop yields and the availability of food. Now, the high energy prices and the shortage in petrochemical feedstock, which is essentially raw material derived from refining oil and natural gas, is impacting the production capacity, be it in plastics, in steels, in aluminum, or automotive manufacturing. Now, helium supplies have also been disrupted, with 1/3 of global production offline. Qatar, which accounts for about 30% of those supplies, has halted production after attacks on its facilities. Now, it's affecting the semiconductor industry and medical imaging, among others. The aviation industry is seeing disruptions. Jet fuel prices have shot up 50 to 60%, and that means airlines have been forced to increase price costs. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency says Europe roughly has about 6 weeks of jet fuel supply left. Now, shipping, the backbone of global trade, has also been hit hard. Now, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has left hundreds of oil tankers and commercial ships stranded for weeks. Now, threats of attacks here, which connects to the Suez Canal, has led ships to take the longer route and go right round the Cape of Good Hope to reach European shores, and that increases transit time. And finally, tourism, it's being impacted. Now, estimates suggest the losses are anywhere between $30 to $55 billion. Remember, countries here have been increasing tourism investment with the aim of diversifying their economies, but the war could change all that.
All right, let's speak to Seb Kennedy, an independent energy analyst and founding editor of Energy Flux. That's an independent intelligence platform covering gas and LNG markets, joining us live from San Jose in Costa Rica. Thank you for speaking to us. Now, whatever way you look at this war is bad news for the global markets now, and even worse if it continues. So what is, in your opinion, the best case scenario and the worst in this situation?
Yeah, great question, and thanks for having me on the show today. So I think that obviously the best case scenario is that there's some sort of negotiated agreement that allows for the resumption of commodity outflows through the Strait of Hormuz. Before the war, then obviously we had unimpeded outflows from Hormuz. So no matter what way you look at it, the best case scenario is not going to be quite as good as what we had before, because it seems like regime change is essentially off the table. That was the only pathway to getting back to a place where there is no risk hanging over transits through Hormuz. So any negotiated agreement is going to have a kind of sword of Damocles element to it, where the threat of Iranian disruption to LNG and oil flows through Hormuz is going to be dangling over there. I don't see the Iranians wanting to give up that leverage, which has proved to be extremely powerful, anytime soon. So we're going to see disruption, or the potential of disruption, kind of hanging over markets, no matter how good a deal may be that comes out of the talks in Pakistan, if indeed those actually happen.
Right, and the International Energy Agency has called this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. It seems to have gone past just uncertainty. What can the global markets do to mitigate the effects that they're seeing now? Are there any sort of contingency plans, whether it's on a country basis or regional basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And countries have been, every single country is making its own arrangements and responding in whichever way it sees fit. I would say the broad point is that certainly from a kind of LNG and natural gas perspective, that Asian economies have really been the shock absorber for the world. The fuel switching, the demand reduction, the mothballing of factories, the shortening of the working week, that's all helped to absorb the cumulative supply loss from the disruption to LNG flows out of Hormuz. Modelling by my firm, Energy Flux, shows that the market has absorbed a cumulative supply loss of about 12 million tons of LNG since the start of the war. That's equivalent to about the entire annual output of Oman, which has an LNG project, or of Indonesia. So we're talking about a pretty substantial volume of LNG. And with every day that goes on, then obviously the cumulative supply loss gets bigger and bigger. If it gets to Christmas, we could be looking at more than 60 million tons of LNG missing from the market. So there's only there's a kind of ticking time bomb, if you like, over how long the market can go on absorbing all of these lost molecules, and the physical shortages spreading from, for example, Asia to parts of Europe, and even potentially affecting consumers in the United States.
Right, a sobering reality there, as you said, a ticking time bomb. Thank you very much, Seb Kennedy, an independent energy analyst and also founding editor of Energy Flux. Now, Hezbollah says it fired rockets at northern Israel in response to Israeli truce violations in southern Lebanon.